Right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting. I think this is the 10th one this season, so there's only sadly 2 more to go. It didn't have flash past me, but let's enjoy this while we can. As usual, if there's anybody on Zoom who's had any problems, do put a message in the chat to Elaine, who is hosting tonight. You'll see her down on the list somewhere. And I'd just like to welcome one new member. We have Jonathan Pearson join us. Is he here tonight anywhere? No, well, welcome in anyway, and I hope he has a long, happy association with the club. Right, as usual, I'll just go through some future meetings for ourselves and some of the other local organisations. Our next indoor meeting 2 weeks today on the 20th is the photo competition. So a highlight of the year, as far as I'm concerned. We always get some fabulous photos. I've just heard from Jane that she's had a reasonable number of entries. Is that reasonable? Yeah. But there's still just about time to put more entries in. It closes on Friday, so I'm guessing 1 minute to midnight. Bang on midnight. Okay. Oh, you are kind. And there's 3 categories. Remember, portrait, flight and action. Flight or action, I should say, and birds in Berkshire. So please send your photos in. The next outdoor meeting. Oh.
When you say birds of Berkshire,
Oh yes, birds in Berkshire. Yes, any. I wouldn't want it to be in a cage in Berkshire, but yeah. So just to ask for those of you on Zoom, just asking for a bit of clarification. Birds in Berkshire is for photos of birds, wild birds in Berkshire. So yes. And our next outdoor meeting is on Saturday when Rob Godden is organising a day trip to Kent. He asked me to remind people tonight, and if you're interested in going, it's not too late, but please do contact him as soon as possible. He's not here sadly tonight, but I'm sure if you get him, send him an email or ring him tomorrow, he'll be able to include you. And while I think about our programme, we do have copies, rather late in the season, I know we do actually every meeting have copies of our programme if anybody wants a paper copy. I keep forgetting to mention them. So, right. Other local groups, NDOC, their indoor meeting, their next one is Thursday next week on the 14th, when Richard Stansfield is going to be talking about Australia. And their next outdoor is on Sunday the 10th, when they're having a morning walk at West Woodhay, near Inkpen. For the Reading RSPB group, the next indoor is on Tuesday next week on the 12th, which Jonathan Thorgum, you might remember, spoke to us a few weeks back. He's talking about Bird Walk to Hell, which apparently is in northern Poland. So hell with 1 L. And their next outdoor meeting is on the 17th of March, when they're doing a minibus tour to Blashford Lakes in Hampshire. If you want any contact details for any of these, by the way, see me at the break. I'll point you in the right direction. And the last group to mention is the Buckingham and Bracknell RSPB group. Their next indoor meeting is also on the 14th of March, the same as NDOC. And it's going to be Stephen Lovell talking about Lincolnshire's birds and reserves, which I think we had about a year or 2 ago. I think it was an excellent talk. Very good. And their next outdoor is also on Sunday, the 17th of March, when they're going to the London Wetland Centre in London at Barnes. So, as I said, do see me if you want any more info. Anybody who's been watching the introductory slides will see that I put in an extra one about the auction that's on tomorrow. So 6 of Robert Gilmore's report covers are being auctioned on by Dominic Winter auctioneers tomorrow. And we've already sent out emails about this, so hopefully everybody who's interested has seen that. But if anybody again does want to know more about it, let me know. They are lots 659 to 664, and you can watch live and bid live if you wish to as well. Right, any recent sightings? Anybody seen anything exciting, interesting, or just found out weird? Did anybody see the great white?
Just in Berkshire.
Oh, preferably in Berkshire, yes. Did anybody see the white-tailed eagle 2 days ago? It apparently one flew over Moor Green Lake, so I'm guessing it flew over because there's 2 reports on Berks birds and no other mention of it anywhere I could see.
Because somebody then thought it was a dark-coloured buzzard.
Sorry?
It was then thought it was a dark-coloured
Oh, was
buzzard
it?
hanging around. It's a little ball.
Wow. Okay, right. Hopefully that will get corrected then. Any recent sightings? What have you seen?
Black cap on my feed the other day, but it's not that unusual, is it?
Well, I don't know. That Sue just said she's had a male and a female black cap on her feeder together. I normally only see one over the winter, but that does sound like they might be pairing up ready for nesting.
Okay.
Which is apt for tonight. Any other recent sightings? Anybody on Zoom wants to say anything?
Stone check.
A pair of stone chaps at what school is it? It's on Alder Grove School, just outside Shinfield. So very nice. Good. Hopefully there'll be baby ones later then. And Elaine's putting her hand up.
Anna says she's just had 1 black cap and 12 plus siskins.
Oh, very nice one. I'm presumably in a garden.
Presumably in a garden.
Yeah, excellent. Right, if there's no other recent sightings, I'm going to hand you over in a minute to Sean Murphy, who's the Berkshire BTO rep. He's going to say a few words about BTO surveys. We thought it'd be apt tonight to do that. And let me just set his slides up, and then we can get on with it. There you are. I hope you can all on Zoom now see updates on BTO in Berkshire. So let me pass you over to Sean Murphy.
Something down on this one?
Sorry?
Something down on this?
No, on here. That's not being used. It's on the laptop.
Okay, it's this one. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sally, and good evening to everybody.
Sorry to make you need to get right up to your mouth. It's switched on, it's working, it just needs to be very close.
Right, like a pot.
Right, that's it, absolutely.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
Good. This is the second update on BTO surveys and other activities requested by the BOC. Obviously the first one for 2024. Now, as before, there isn't time to cover absolutely everything, but I emphasise if there's any questions about any of the BTO activities, surveys, please do contact me. If you want information or you have questions, it's no problem at all. So let's just run through a few things that sort of to update you on what's going on. First of all, some previous surveys. Last year was the National Woodcock Survey, 2023, and there's now some preliminary results out. They're very preliminary, but worth sharing things. The 2023 survey was the 3rd national survey, the first being in 2003. And the second in 2013. So it's every 10 years. But the one last year was particularly important, A, because it had the largest participation of any of the national surveys. And secondly, it's important because the woodcock, as probably most of you know, is a declining species and now a red listed species on the UK list of birds of conservation. The estimates of the population size still being progressed by BTO and I think the Game Conservancy. So those are not available, but there is now information for the BTO regions that we can talk about. Nationally, there was 1,230 random squares that were covered. And then in that table, you can see that 34 were allocated to Berkshire. Before I go on, for the national survey, the 1 kilometre survey squares differ from the annual woodcock survey in that they're the same squares are used as in the previous national survey. So the population estimates between the different national surveys are compatible, and there's no bias. But so for the Berkshire region, we were allocated 34, and 50% were actually covered very kindly by volunteers. And it was found that 53% of those had woodcock. Now, interestingly, though, although that was, it's a relatively small sample size, the maximum count in one was 21, and we had a mean count of 11.9 across all the occupied squares. In actual fact, Berkshire was one of the BTO regions with one of the highest mean counts across the whole of the national survey. So, I mean, we can conclude, at least tentatively, that woodlands in Berkshire seem to be particularly important for breeding woodcock. If you're interested in looking at this further, I can give you the website there that you can look at this further on the BTO page. And just to add at the end there, that the BTO annual woodcock survey is now back up and running. So details for the 24 are on the website. And if you want to get involved, then just have a look at that. Also contact me if you need further information or guidance, and we can steer you in the right direction. Oops, wait. Now turning to one of the core surveys that just about everybody must be familiar with, the breeding bird survey. What I wanted to say was that if you didn't know, this is the 30th year for this survey. It was started in 1994, and it sort of took over from the Common Bird Census, which was running at the time. That the previous survey was incredibly useful and effective, and it ran for another 7 years after this survey started. But the problem was that the Common Bird survey was basically just too labour intensive for most people, so they had to sort of simplify it. But anyway, there's an excellent article about the history of the breeding bird survey in the latest BTO news. So if you're a member of the BTO, you'll be getting this. This is written by James Haywood, the national coordinator. It makes very, very interesting reading. And then just to add that we're rapidly progressing towards the breeding season of our birds. So in the next few weeks, for those who are volunteering for the breeding bird survey and have requested recording form, I will be sending those out in those next few weeks. If you're interested, you're also interested in joining the survey, then please look at the website and or contact me, and we can take it from there. Another survey that's still ongoing, but it only actually started last year, was the winter gull survey, roost survey, wings. We talked about this last November when I gave the first update on the BTO activities. Just a sort of a recap on it. This is a new survey, started last year, finishes in 2025 next year. And the reason for it is that, again, gull populations are in decline. But in addition to that, the UK is a very important region in Europe for wintering population of gulls. So the survey has 3 aims, which I've listed there, but the most important one there is the aim to identify sites within the UK that might be important as roosting sites during the winter that can be recommended for special protection areas. At the moment, SPAs, when they're set up, the criteria for setting them up does not include the roosting sites in the winter for gulls. So it's really important to get a handle on that, so that can be included in the recommendations for future SPAs. The survey itself is divided into key and sample sites. Key sites are defined as where historically it's known that over 1,000 gulls sort of have been roosting at those sites. Sample sites are just additional sites that might be of interest. Within Berkshire, we have 6 key sites that were set up for us. 4 of those are being kindly monitored by volunteers, which I've shown there in blue. And we also have 1 sampling site, that's Rotherham Nature Reserve, being covered by the Berkshire Wildlife Trust. The first survey for this gull survey was conducted in January. That was the first one, and it's pretty new to just about everybody. We've had some useful feedback from those that did the work in Berkshire, and that's sort of 2 issues arose. The most important one was that in monitoring the key sites, around the field gravel pits and moorlands, was that the gull populations are moving very quickly backwards and forwards. And so the kind of discussion at the moment is when the next survey comes up, we're going to need a lot more coordination, basically, to make sure that there are people that maybe will be counted some time. The other one was, which was totally unpredictable for some of our volunteers, was they went along on the night of the survey and the access was denied because the weather was so bad, and so basically access to the public had been cut off. But anyway, I mean, these are just some of the things that we're learning at the moment. Again, if you're interested in getting involved with the Wings survey, I've given the website there and/or contact me. There is a new survey in design at the moment, which is going to be planned to come live in 2025. This is the Urban Green Space Survey by BTO. I can only give a preliminary outline now, but we've been asked to sort of start saying something about this survey. The background is, as we all know, urban areas are being gradually increasing the whole country, and they continue to increase, and they will increase. A big conservation question has always been, not just for birds, is how is wildlife faring in these urban environments? So this particular survey, the Urban Green Based Survey by BTO, is focused on bird populations, and it basically has these 3 main aims listed here in blue: to assess the importance of these species relative to the UK bird populations, to study optimal management options, and to increase engagement with local communities. Now, apparently the survey will have 2 types of surveys: structured surveys, probably of bird populations, and equally important, engagement surveys with stakeholders. So the next steps that have been working on at the moment is to develop a stakeholder engagement and to start finding out, ascertain interest across the country about from local groups that might be interested in getting involved in this, and also to run some pilot surveys to finalise the survey designs. Now, there's not a lot to go on at the moment, but if you'd like to be kept up to date, if you think this might be of interest, anybody here, or if you know of people that might be interested, please ask them to contact me, and I will endeavour to keep them updated as information becomes available as the survey design gets finalised. Turning now to something completely different, bird track users, and in particular the app for mobile devices. I would imagine if you're a bird track user, you know about this, but I thought I'd just mention it, that there's been several updates over the last year or so to the bird track app, but there was one that was launched in December. So in case you didn't know about it, this new update can be found in the stats button shown here with the at the bottom of the home page of the bird track on your app there. But the whole what this allows, what this update allows you to do is explore your own data in more detail than that was previously possible. So apparently you can look at lists of sites you visited, you can look at maps, see which month you saw the most species, etc. I will admit I've not actually tried this yet. I do use bird track, but I haven't actually tried it myself. So anyway, just in case you didn't know, there is now that function within the stats button. And allegedly there is another development for the bird track app that will be announced in the spring, which I know nothing about. Anyway, to keep us things. Finally, BTO online training opportunities. Again, if you didn't know, there is a Songbird ID, either through site or sound, that is available. The cost is £36, but this is being run online by BTO HQ, and besides covering common garden birds, it's also going to cover tricky groups like chats, pipits and warblers, not just sort of, well, is any warbler common apart from the blackcap, but a whole range of different warblers, starting with the ones that you're most likely to come across, but then some of the more tricky ones that you might see going to reserve, something like that. There are there's three online sessions, each an hour and 3/4, with one per week, run in excessive weeks. And the dates and time, these dates and these time options are on a Tuesday in the evening, on a Wednesday in the morning, or Wednesday in the afternoon. So anyway, if you're interested, that is available. There are other training courses that will be announced. I mean, for example, I know that probably Lee is going to talk about training for the inestimable public films. Thanks. I think that's it. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you, Sean. I can't say anything other than I'd encourage everybody to get involved. I think you've got a question.
Yeah.
Neil.
Has your Abbey address now been closed?
Sorry, Neil, what was that?
I was asking, has your Abbey address now been closed?
Oh, your email. A question about your email address. Is your cabby, did you say?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to again about that. It's probably not going to be discussed in an open forum here. Use the Gmail one for the moment. The other one that I use most commonly is still there, but I'm going to have a chat with Jane at the break. Please, okay. But just carry on using the one that you're familiar with, Neil. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say I'm gearing myself up for the BBS soon. I thoroughly enjoy doing the squares I've got, except for the mud on one of them, but that's another matter. And I'm really interested in the urban space, green space. Please do, I'll be emailing you to say, please do keep me up to date with that. It's great to see some of the results as well for something like the woodcock survey. I find it a very good way of doing birding, going out surveying, and it also has improved my or skills of bird identification simply because I've got to. It's a good reason. Right, enough of that. Let me pass you over to Lee. If I'd ask Lee to share his screen, please. Great. Let me just do a little bit of setting up on the view on our screen. So I can read it. I'll just set it so we can just see Lee. Right, let me just find my notes. Introduce you to the main speaker for this evening. Actually, I forgot, Lee, to ask you, where are you speaking from? I presume you're at home in Norfolk?
Yeah, that's it, in Thetford.
I'm not surprised, yes.
Yeah, 12 minutes walk from BTO.
Very nice. Lovely part of the world to live in. Anyway, he worked there, you can tell, works for the BTO. I believe you're the demographic surveys organiser. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It does.
And he runs 2 national ringing projects, the Constant Method Sites and the Retrapping Adults for Survival, and various other ringing projects, and the Nest Record Scheme, which is tonight's topic. Been ringer for about 20 years, and his main interests are ringing and nesting. But he also trains other people. That must be really interesting. So I'll pass you over to Lee to talk about the Nest Record Scheme, what it's about, how to record the info, and making sure that we prioritise the birds. So I'll pass you over, Lee.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sally, and thanks very much, Sean, for a great roundup of the BTO. Yeah, thanks for the invite, and apologies that I can't make it in person this time. But yeah, so what a great time of year to be giving a talk on the Nest Record Scheme when the birds are thinking about nesting. And some birds have already started. I know here in Thetford, we've got Egyptian geese that are on nests at the moment, mallard, blackbird, and long-tailed tits are definitely thinking about it as well. So yeah, it's all going on, but it's going to snowball very soon with lots of activity going on. So as Sally said, yeah, I'm the demographic surveys organizer, which basically means any sort of structured ringing I look after, and those bird ringers that participate in those surveys, I communicate with those and collect all the data, and then someone slightly smarter than me does all the analysis. And from that, we get lots of information about survival and productivity of our British birds, as well as the migrants, of course. But since 2019, I became the Nest Record Scheme organizer, and that is quite a tall order because it's a very old scheme. And I've been working at the BTO now for about 16 years, somewhere around there. Most of my time was dealing with reports of ringed birds, where somebody would phone up with a ring that they'd found on a bird, and we would inform them of the history of that bird. So now I'm going to summarize the talk, and it will basically start with a Nest Record Scheme introduction, followed by how to get good data, and then how to get started in the Nest Record Scheme if you want to. Okay. So the Nest Record Scheme is one of those schemes which is lesser known to quite a few people, but compared to the Breeding Bird Survey, which Sean covered there. But the Nest Record Scheme is one of the BTO's longest running surveys, and it's 85 years old this year. And that was just a few years after the BTO was founded in 1933. And it was the Nest Record Scheme was started by 2 gentlemen, James Fisher, who was a broadcaster, and Julian Huxley, who was an academic. And their idea was to create a short-term survey, not 85 years, I'm pretty sure, but a short-term survey that looked at about 10 species. And the aim of that was to collect the really basic information, like, you know, the vital statistics about birds, like how many eggs do they lay, how long do they take to hatch, and their brood size and things like that. So it was really basic information. These days, things have moved on somewhat. And nowadays, we receive about 40,000 nest records covering 150 different species. Of course, most of those, well, a lot of those are going to be blue tit, grey tit, common birds like that. But we get all sorts of rarer species like wood sandpipers and eagles and all sorts of different things. And it's vitally important that we have a handle on the productivity of all of our British birds. We also do collect some information on overseas birds as well, particularly where they don't have a nest record scheme of their own in that country. So many people think about bird surveys or biological recording in general. They just think about identifying birds and counting them, or trees or butterflies. But the nest record scheme is one of those where you don't normally think about looking into nests. So, as the breeding bird survey, for example, that follows a preset route in an area which is allocated to the volunteer and produces trends like what you can see here for meadow pipit from 1994 to 2013. And basically along the bottom, we've got a timeline, and it goes from 1994 to 2013, like I said, and vertically, it's the number of birds in that population, with the thick green line being the trend averaged out, and then the lighter green is the confidence limits. So how sure that you are actually that is the actual trend. So the nest record scheme is much less standardized than that, and well, most other BTO surveys, to be honest. And because you aren't told what species to monitor, what patch or square to survey, what times you do it, and what sort of nest recording you do. So it's very different, which can help to be very flexible. And also, you don't really need to count the number of pairs in the territories, for example. But this can help with nest recording. So knowing how many breeding pairs you've got in a particular area, you can actually home in and get that amount of nests. But generally, it's not needed. So where does the nest record scheme fit into the whole scheme of things? So most of the BTO surveys contribute to what's called an integrated population monitoring. And each survey provides a little bit of information to detect the change of bird numbers as well as the reason for it. So top left, we've got the breeding bird survey, which gives us a good idea of how many birds there are during the summer. The Webb's survey does this very similar thing for the winter. And then BirdTrack can fill in the gaps if there are any, as well as looking at phonology and several other things. And RAS, you can see in the bottom left, that stands for Retrapping Adults for Survival. And that's a survey that I look after. And basically, ringers go out, they specialize on a particular species, or several, but generally it's one species, and they try and catch as many birds, adult birds, in a particular population as possible. And the idea is to then either recite them or catch them again the next year. And from looking at year to year and which birds are surviving, you would get a good idea of survival for those adults. And we've got quite a few different species that are covered. The other survey that gives survival is CES, which is a constant effort site scheme, where ringers go out and put nets up on 12 sessions in the summer at the same place at the same time of year every year. And from that, we also get the survival rate, catching birds from one year to the next. But by looking at how many adults you catch to how many juveniles you catch, you can get a good idea of how productive they are. So if you, for example, you catch just 2 adult robins, and by the end of the season, you've got 17 little robins or juvenile robins, then you've got a good idea that it was quite a productive year. But if you've only got 2 adults and 2 juveniles, then it hasn't been. So, and we can do that for 24 different species, just the common ones, the woodland birds, the garden birds, and some of our migrants as well. So that gives a good idea of the productivity while the birds are flying around. But the nest record scheme fits in by giving information on how productive the nesting attempt itself is. So we will, from looking at this, we're able to tell how, if nests are failing at the egg stage, are they failing at the chick stage? Are they just not laying as many eggs as they used to? And that sort of thing. So here you can sort of look at the cause of why things are changing. And obviously, all of this information has to be communicated. So you can look at the Bird Atlas or various publications that BTO does to see what the results of these surveys are. So, in principle, the use of the nest record scheme data is studying the cause of the population change. From information like the breeding bird survey, that gives them information on if the population is changing, but the nest record scheme adds the bit of information into why. So without assessing the reasons why, it's unlikely that we're able to help very much with bird populations and getting conservationists to change their trajectory if they're declining in particular. So long-term changes in the timing of breeding and productivity can be compared with population trends to see if there might be a relationship. So this is quite key, really. So if here we've got the population of, well, the population trend of blackbird. And if we look at the nest productivity as well, we can see here the fledglings per breeding attempt, which is the one figure that's really useful from the nest record scheme. So every nesting attempt, on average, how many chicks does it produce? And you can see here from the trend from 1996 to 2013. Initially in 1996, the number of fledglings was quite low, and then it peaked in 1990, and then it went back down in 2010. So having a good idea of the nest productivity is very important. And then when we calculate the survival of the adults, which you can see here is pretty constant, to be honest. It's about 60%, somewhere around there, over the years. So from that, we can determine that the nest productivity could be a key factor in the change in the population. And then conservationists can look at this data and focus specifically on the nest stage. And then from the nest data, what part of the nest stage is it important and what could be affecting all of this? So another example is the predation of wader chicks, which has been identified as one of the key drivers for wader decline in recent history, particularly at the egg stage, but it's throughout generally. Okay. And all this information has got to be communicated, of course. So the BTO website has a lot of information on the details, and the birds. We used to produce this bird trends page, which has now been merged into the bird facts pages, which is a really useful resource And I use it all the time actually for looking at trends and survival rates and all sorts of things. So yeah, I recommend you having a look at that for the long-term changes. And you can see here that the page has ended up on, it's got 6 graphs there. The top 4 are from the Nest record scheme for Blackbird, and the bottom two, sorry, are from the CES. The bottom left being productivity and bottom right being the survival of blackbirds. And it's really good that we've got such a large, long-running data set that we can look at these changes and figure out patterns and reasons why things happen. Okay, there's another communication source that we use as well as the BTO website, and that's Life Cycle magazine. And all ringers and nest recorders get a copy of Life Cycle magazine when it comes out, and that includes information on the breeding season results. So you can see here for some of our migrants, we've got the key parameters or outputs that the Nest record scheme produces. So laying date in days, that's from median point. So if it's a minus figure, then it's got earlier. And there we've also got clutch size shown as a percentage. So how much that changes over time. So Sand Martin, for example, is the clutch size is reduced by 0.2 of an egg, I assume. And you've got the same for brood size. And then we can calculate the survival. Looking at the outcomes of the nesting attempt, we can say what's the likelihood of the survival rate at the egg stage and the chick stage, and that's done per day. And then the ultimate, right at the end, is the fledglings produced by for a nesting attempt. And you can see there the chiff chaff, the third one down, increased fledglings per breeding attempt by 31%. So that's quite a massive increase. And you can see that the blue is quite statistically significant in a positive direction, with red being negative. So Sand Martin didn't do very well in this particular year, with 10% egg stage failure, which was unfortunate. But all these figures change every year as well. So you can see patterns, like bullfinch nest survival has been constantly low for quite some time, and then we don't see very many bullfinches. Okay. So those are the BTO outputs. However, the long-term Nest record scheme data set is continually used in special studies where both amateurs and professional academics try to use the data set to address research questions. And here are a few examples shown on the screen there from Life Cycle magazine. So yeah, we get data requests frequently asking for certain sets of data that we're able to share and increase our knowledge collectively of our British birds. So bear in mind that it's precisely because surveys like the Nest record scheme are operated, well, they're done by volunteers, that they can be funded and run indefinitely, and we can end up with such long-term data sets like what we've got here. And we do need these long-term data sets to look at the changes over time, particularly for things like climate change and the introduction of non-native species. Because you can't see changes from one year to the next most often, but you have to look at the big picture, and that's long, big data sets. So here we can see seasonal decline in willow warbler productivity by Cat Morrison. So that was a really interesting product there, showing in the southeast really reduced productivity. with an increase in Scotland, interestingly, but on average it was still declining. And then we've got the mismatches between data and ants in colonizing wood warbler nests and all sorts of different things. So that's enough of the science, and I'm going to show you a very nice nest. Hopefully you'll be able to, know that this is a dunnock nest, a beautiful little nest of tight moss with a few rootlets and amazing sky blue eggs inside. So yeah, it's when the adult or the female is brooding or incubating the eggs, you can't really see the nest, but as soon as she gets off, it's a phenomenal color really, and the images I'm sure don't do it justice from the actual nest with eggs. So lots of our small passerines, like this dunnock, have a lot to think about during the breeding season. Raising a family uses a lot of energy, whilst having to contend with predators and weather, both of which can easily decide the fate of a nest. So it doesn't take very long for dunnocks to raise a family, however. So they'll build the nest, which can take about a week, somewhere around there. Then they lay an egg, and then the next day they lay another egg, and till the clutch is complete. And then they'll start incubation. So the idea of that is that all the eggs will hatch at the same time, which is key for all of them leaving at the same time and keeping all your brood together. Having an old chick that has left the nest 5 days before the last one will be very confusing. So, and the basic aim of it is to get the chicks out of the nest as quickly as possible. So if the female is not around the nest very much, then there'll be less scent for predators and less activity for them to home in on. So keeping it away from the nest and then incubating for about 2 weeks. I think it's about 12 days actually. So incubating for about that for 12 days, and then the eggs will hatch, and those chicks will then be in the nest for another 12 days or so. So just in under a month, new dunnocks are around, flying about, and they start life probably, the egg is probably about the size of your little fingernail. So it's quite phenomenal to go from that into fully grown, flying around dunnocks in 2 weeks. It does boggle my mind sometimes. So the breeding cycle, which I'm sure you all aware of, starts by choosing a mate. Then they build the nest, which takes varying amounts of time, and the female more often builds the nest, but sometimes the male helps, and sometimes it's a joint thing. Then the eggs are laid, usually all in day intervals, unless the bird is quite large, and then it can be 2 or 3 days between each egg. While I'm on the subject of egg laying, owls are one of those species that start incubation from the first egg. And the idea of that is they need the chicks to be different ages. So when there's a food shortage, the older chick will survive, either by just being at the front of the queue for all the food, and the little one behind not getting any, or the chick eats the other chick, which adds extra sustenance. So it's a really good adaptation to food shortages. Otherwise, the whole brood might go. So that's what they do. And then after egg laying, incubation, then they all hatch, then they fledge. And usually they either choose another mate, or more often they go for another nesting attempt if they are multi-brooded. So birds like blue tit, tawny owl, mute swan usually have 1 brood a year, sort of all their eggs in one basket as such. Blue tit is one of those that actually lays a lot of eggs in one go. So they can have around 14 eggs in some nests, and that can get incredibly crowded, but they only have one attempt, so they try and cram it in. If birds are predated, well, not the birds themselves, if the nest is predated, particularly at the egg stage, there is a reasonable chance that the birds will lay again to try and get a brood off. If the species is single brooded, they can still do this, but it depends on when the nest is predated to if they're able to do this or not. It's all down to the amount of resources that they can put in to raising a brood. Some birds, however, are multi-brooded, and they can have another nesting attempt after they've successfully fledged their previous nest. And then some birds, like blackbird, song thrush, wood pigeon, can go on to a third or even a fourth nesting attempt. And you've probably seen like blackbirds in the autumn, especially the females they just look tired. Their feathers are worn and they're just moving around, not looking very happy with themselves, because they're probably exhausted from the amount of energy that they've had to put in to raising multiple broods. What happens after the nesting has happened is that the adults molt all of their feathers on their body, and then they have a really nice fresh plumage to go into the winter with, to keep warm and be able to fly around properly. And this is a pair of mute swans that I know quite well. This is CA and FS. I ringed these, must be about 8 years ago now. And I put those colorings on, and I've been monitoring these birds ever since. Unfortunately, for the past 4 years, they haven't been able to actually raise any cygnets. They build the nest, like what you can see here, with CA on the left, sitting on the nest. But they must be so old that they aren't able to actually produce any eggs in this case, because I've never seen any eggs in the nest. But they still go through the motions of building the nest and protecting it and that sort of thing. So what birds like blue tit and great tit are trying to do when they have their brood is to hit a peak in food availability of the winter moth caterpillar. And the idea is that there's lots of food around just at the point when the chicks need it most. So there shouldn't be that much food around when they're eggs, but as soon as the chicks hatch, then that is the time that they need the most food. What has been happening the past few years, so last year was okay, it was about average, but the previous year, if I remember correctly, it was incredibly cold. So no, it was incredibly hot. And that meant that the caterpillars developed much, much quicker than they would normally do. And when the chicks were ready for all this food, these caterpillars were actually flying around as moths, which can take quite a toll on the chicks because they don't have enough food. Unfortunately, the previous year, it was the opposite, where it was really cold. And that delayed everything. So there was chicks in the nest waiting for food when the caterpillars were still eggs, or very small, and the blue tit suffered for that as well. So not normally, you don't normally get it that way around, where it's extreme either end and the birds suffer. It's on average, things seem to pan out okay. So with larger birds like these, the mute swan pair that you can see here, it just takes them a long time to raise their cygnets. So they are only able to fit in one nesting attempt a year. So that's a different reason for the blue tit and grey tit. So in the time a pair of dunnocks, for example, have built a nest, they've laid their eggs, and they've fledged their chicks, a mute swan pair, not this one, but a general mute swan pair has laid its eggs and they are only just hatching. So that's about 34 to 45 days, somewhere around there. So, and then it takes another 4 to 5 months for the cygnets to fledge, as far as we're concerned. And fledging, in the eyes of the nest record scheme, is when the chicks are able to fly. So the cygnets obviously leave the nest at a few days old, but then they swim around with their parents, but don't technically fledge until they can fly. So this slow breeding for mute swan isn't a problem, as this species it lives much longer than a dunnock, for example. And to keep the population stable for mute swan, this pair only needs to replace themselves. So in, I don't know, the longevity for a mute swan is about 27 years. So in that time, they would only need to raise 2 cygnets to replace themselves to keep the population stable. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to data collection and how to get quality information. So principally, the nest record scheme is about monitoring individual nesting attempts. So if a multi-brooded species like blackbird has several nesting attempts, we focus on the one nesting attempt and then focus on the next nesting attempt. So if a nest recorder goes into the field and finds this mute swan, for example, they are tasked with recording the location of the nest. If I can get there, we go. And that's important for analyzing data at the regional level. And then following on from that, we record the habitat, the surrounding habitat to the nest. And this is really, well, whereabouts the adult goes to collect the food, really. When birds are nesting, generally they don't move too far away from the nest unless they have to. So that habitat details is recorded. And then we've got the information on the nest site itself. And then even further in, we record information on the timing and the contents and the outcome of the individual nesting attempt itself. So the standardized way we monitor a nesting attempt is to make repeat visits to the nest to record what's in the nest and what the adults are doing. Ideally, until the nesting attempt is finished and hopefully the chicks have left the nest to make it out on their own. So what I'm going to do now is go through a sort of a simulated nest record and run you through the process of what a nest recorder would go through. And here you can see one of the old nest record cards that we rarely use these days. And the information on this card is all collected all together and these days entered electronically. But for showing you guys how we record it, this is quite a useful way of doing it. So this simulated nest record was found in 2002 and it was a blabby, so the BTO code for blackbird. And the observer has the observer code of WAG, and it was in Norfolk at 34 meters. And we've got the grid reference there. On the back of this card, there will be information on the actual habitat codes. So whereabouts that the nest is located, what is it in, and that sort of thing. So much more information. So in this example, on the 15th of April at 9 o'clock, the nest recorder found this blackbird nest. And you can see there that it's got 5 beautiful eggs in a sort of a rootlet lined or grassy lined nest. And they can be quite bulky. So you can see in the middle there, there's a code FN, which stands for female on the nest. And to help us capture all of the information that we need, a lot of our details are recorded in code, so we're able to enter them much easier. It's also quicker to record when you're actually in the field as well. So you don't have to write longhand, and it can be computerized much easier. So the female was on the nest, and obviously she got off for the nest recorder to be able to have a look in. And then on the next visit, on the 22nd of April at 1 o'clock, the nest recorder looked in the nest and found this. 1 egg and 3 chicks. And the codes HA stands for it's just hatched, or the chicks have just hatched. And BL, they are blind. And FN, the female, is on the nest again. So that's really nice to see. Nice development going on. Then on the next visit, 8 days later, on the 30th, at 2 o'clock, the nest recorder saw this. 3 big chicks. And these chicks are probably 3/4 grown now, and their feathers are short. So we're looking basically at the pin feathers on the primaries, but if you look on the back of the middle blackbird, you can see that there's a waxy sheath. And what happens is that the tip breaks open and the feather sort of protrudes, grows out of there. And then eventually that waxy sheath would fall away and create the actual feather itself. So FS stands for the feathers are just peeking out of that waxy sheath. And EY, the eyes are open, and PN, the pair is near the nest. Probably feeding, because blackbirds at this stage require a lot of food because they're doing a lot of growing very quickly. Then on the 4th of May at 7 o'clock, the nest recorder went to the nest and actually found this, a recently fledged blackbird. And that's what the code NN stands for. So young near nest. The nest recorder also probably went to the nest to see a well-trodden nest that contains quite a bit of poo and evidence that the blackbirds actually got really big before they left the nest. So the key thing and then what would happen is that the nest recorder has finished the nest record. The NN is the outcome code. So this nest was successful, which is brilliant news. And then at the end of the nesting season, or even during the nesting season, the nest recorder will submit all of this information with any of the other nests that they have found to the BTO for processing. So the key thing here to note about the simulated nest record is that the nest wasn't monitored from when the first twig was placed on the branch. By the time the volunteer found it, it was already in progress. So they also didn't visit the nest every day. We don't need that for the nest record scheme. And they didn't actually see the chicks leaving the nest either. So by knowing information on average laying dates and incubation times, which we've got at the BTO, the nest recorder can get all the information that they need just by several well-timed visits. So you can see here, we've only got 4 visits to the nest, and we've got just about everything we need. So if, for example, a nest recorder sees recently hatched chicks in the nest, then 2 weeks later, those chicks should fledge. So you can visit around that time to maximize your chance of seeing the fledged chicks. And from our data point of view, 2 weeks previous to the recently hatched chicks, incubation should have started. So by looking at the evidence of the current pair of birds in the area, and looking at the nest itself, the nest recorder can infer that there was it's successful or it was a failure. For example, if the nest that this nest recorder had looked at, if they went and there was 5 eggs and the next time it was empty, but in that time they should have only just been hatching, then we know that it's definitely a failed nest. And if there's no contents, then it's highly likely to have been predated. So here's the key things for any nest record, and to, well, basically for the ultimate nest record. We collect information on the location and the nest site, but we get the first egg date, which is quite a key thing for us as at the nest record scheme, but getting the clutch size and the brood size and the outcome are basically all the information that we need to produce all the information that all the outputs that we get. So you can see for a swan, over a massive 5 to 6 month period, getting clutch size, brood size, and outcome is relatively easy. So that's brilliant. And then all of this information is input. So recently, actually, God, it must be about 5 years now, the BTO released Demography Online, DEMON for short. And this is the online inputting system that ringers and nest recorders use to input all of their information. And this is saved at the BTO. This has come a long way since the nest record cards and posting them to the BTO, where we sort through loads of cards and then send them off to somebody to input them for us, and then we bring them back, load them in, and do all the data. So it's getting very technological these days. You can see on the screen there are 3 blue dots, and they are nest boxes. So we know exactly where the nest is, and we can compare that. We can look at various parameters of habitats and different things like that to improve the value of the nest record, because previously it was down to either 1 kilometer square or slightly more than that. But when you're in the field, all you would need is a notepad, pencil, and that's just about as technical as you need. You might decide to get a GPS to get a grid reference or coordinates when you're on the ground, but nest recording doesn't need very much information at all. So that's quite amazing. So it produces some really unparalleled information here. And this information stored at the BTO. So nest recorders have access to this information from any computer or even on their phone, if there is an internet connection. So that's lovely. So the nest record scheme runs alongside a scheme called Nesting Neighbours. And this is a much more entry-level scheme. All the information from Nesting Neighbours and the nest record scheme goes into one big database. So it all contributes to the same thing. But Nesting Neighbours is a bit more entry level and is really good for those people that only record sort of less than 10 nest records a year in a localized area like your garden or park or something like that. So if you were going to do a little bit of nest recording because you've only got 1 nest box in your garden, then Nesting Neighbours might be quite good. The inputting system is also is much simpler than DEMON as well. So before I go on to the code of conduct, it might be a good place to stop for a break, I'm thinking, because I think it's normally about 8:30 we have a break. I think that's right.
It is.
That's
Excellent.
indeed. I hope you can hear me, Lee. That was excellent. So I'm really impressed with the richness of the data that it gets. So yes, we'll take a break now, and we'll be back with you in about 10 minutes or less. So might as well just leave your screen as it is. Right, I will pass you back over to Lee for the second half.
Thank you very much. God, you didn't mention chocolate biscuits.
Sorry.
Anyway, so yeah, so from all the information that we've covered just now, one of the things that you must be thinking is, what effect does this have on birds? And the mantra of the ringing and nest recording team is the welfare of the bird comes first, which is incredibly important. And all of the nest recorders that sign up to the nest record scheme, they also, to be able to be included, sign up to abide by the nest record scheme code of conduct, which is designed to ensure that monitoring activities don't harm the birds being studied in any way. So this helps to prevent any damage to the nest, causing any accidental desertion, as well as revealing the nest to predators. So in any case, the nest record scheme data is used to monitor the changes in productivity of wild bird populations. So the last thing we want to do is monitor nests which are developing differently to what is actually happening in the wild. It basically becomes rather pointless recording that information if you affect them. So that is the aim of the code of conduct. If I can flick to the next one, and you can have a look at this at your own leisure on the BTO website in the nest record scheme section. So accidental damage is definitely something to be aware of, and that and it's quite phenomenal, really. Where before I was a nest recorder, I would happily walk through a field, maybe with a bit of scrub, a bit of bramble, and carry on straight past. But now I'm a nest recorder, I'm very aware of where birds could be nesting. So if there's a skylark, for example, flying up ahead and there's a little grassy field, I'm going to have to be aware that there could be any skylark nest in there. There could be a mallard, and in the bramble themselves. There could, even though you could see straight through it, there may be a long-tailed tit nest at the top, for example. So that's quite important to be aware of. And yeah, it's being a nest recorder, it sort of enlightens you a little bit to what's potentially there. So things to focus on. Yeah, know exactly where your feet are going, particularly when you're homing into the nest. Now, you know a nest is there, or could be, and you've just got to be careful where you put your feet. Cover up your tracks so that doesn't lead to predators following them in any way. One of the key things is not to lean on any vegetation, particularly if it's a creeper or something like that, where the vegetation is attached to other vegetation. So you've got to be aware of that, because if you move one bit of vegetation, it could move the nest as well. Don't startle adult birds or chicks, and that is one of the things that could lead to the desertion that I mentioned previously. And simply the way you get around that is by not being stealthy. So going up to a nest, the birds will probably see you coming anyway, but making a little bit of noise, tapping the vegetation in a certain so that it makes a little noise, or even humming does the job. So the bird is the female. If the female's on the nest, can move away from the nest, and then you go do the nest recording, and then the bird comes back after. And also don't spend too long near the nest. Basically, all you need to do is have a quick peek, count how many eggs or chicks, and then leave. And there's no need to visit too frequently, like I mentioned previously. So when you're finding a nest, this is important, and when you're revisiting the nest is important as well. Leading predators to the nest is something that people are very aware of, and it does seem obvious that a crow or something could follow you and clean up the nests after you've been, but I've never experienced that. After all the years that I've been doing this, I find that if there is a nest predator, the nest predator is much better at nest finding than the nest recorder, which is sad. But if a jay, for example, it's much more successful in finding nests than I would be, for example. And the amount of nests that I found predated even before I've got there is quite phenomenal in certain species. So this is a beautiful bird, and so this is an eider, and the idea of the code of conduct is to keep birds safe and their breeding attempt as successful as it would be normally. So following these birds is a magical insight into the lives of birds. And nesting is one of those areas where they want to keep it secret. So not many people get to see it. It's quite phenomenal. And that's as a species, but also down at an individual level. So I'm gonna mention this. It's not this eider, but I was before the BTO, I was a warden on the Farne Islands in Northumberland, and we had an eider that used to nest in a flower pot every year outside the warden's accommodation. And she was called Winnie, and basically you would be incredibly close. You could just touch her as you walk past. And to monitor her nest was quite brilliant, really, because she would be sitting in this flower pot, and to record her eggs, you would put your hand just under her breast at the front and basically lift her like a toilet seat. And then you would count how many eggs there were, and then you would put the lid down. And all she would do was a little shuffle and carry on her day, really, which was basically just sitting there. And she had that done to her for years, and she did contribute lots of useful data and raised lots of nice little ducklings. I also monitor quite a few 16 pairs of mute swan in Thetford now, and I know partly because I've ringed them and I know who is who and how many eggs they produce and who is related to who and where they go. So it's amazing the amount of information that you can get just by looking at their eggs and putting a little ring on. So where do you get started? So you might think, for me, being Nest Records scheme organizer and a ringing trainer, that you need a lot of experience to be able to record nests, but this simply is not the case. Anyone can be a nest recorder as long as you follow the code of conduct. And when I'm training my trainees to do ringing, I usually start them on nest recording because it's so easy to do. And I've even submitted some nest records by looking on online and looking at webcams. Ospreys, for example, you can see quite a few ospreys on webcams, and I've submitted nest records and ringing sightings of some birds, partly because I know they're not going to get submitted normally. And I was remembering I was monitoring a pair of ospreys on one of these webcams, and I met the ringer several years later, and he said, "Lee, it was really nice. Thank you for your sightings of this nesting bird that was online and viewable to the masses, because that was the only record I received of that bird." So yeah, it's really good to be able to be doing this. So one thing to stress when you are starting nest recording is that every nest is precious, and every nest record is precious. So no matter what the species, if you look inside the nest and record it and submit it, you can't really go too wrong. So some nest recorders monitor 1 or 2 boxes in their garden each year, and some people go around a patch every week and they try to monitor everything that they find, while others focus on a particular species. So thinking about it at a garden level, so you've got overlapping territories of different species. So basically, usually a garden has got a pair of blue tits, great tit, a pair of dunnocks, a pair of robins, blackbird, house sparrow, wood pigeon, and some of these nest several times a year. So there's a lot of nests around every breeding season. So as a volunteer, you've got to make some decisions about what you do, because there's nests everywhere. It's just finding them. And partly the decisions will be dictated by when you're available, how much time you've got, how much you have to travel, how much energy you have sometimes. So you might find that you might not find in your first year, you might not find very many nests, but that always increases in time. So you know that a particular bush usually has a blackbird nest in it, and you can go to that nest again, or that bush again, and find the nest the next year, and so on, until you get to a point where you think, that is a very nice looking bush. If I was a dunnock, I would nest in there, and then you do. So that's really good. This is sort of the extreme end of nest recording. There was a pair of a nest of lesser whitethroat in here, and it's quite impressive to get into a bramble patch that big. However, it's much easier to look in a nest box. So this is my wife and my daughter monitoring pied flycatcher nest boxes in Wales, where I'm from, and all they're doing is just getting a little ladder, blocking up the hole to see if the female's in there or not for ringing purposes, and having a quick peek, recording what's there. Lid comes down and we move away, and the birds carry on their normal behavior. Back to swans again, partly because they're so extreme. So big white bird, nest of about 2 meters wide, huge, not too difficult to miss really. And surprisingly, we don't get that many nest records of mute swan, considering how many there is in Britain. So you can definitely make a difference by just recording mute swan even. Generally, if it's an open nest, then you're doing something that's more, it contributes more per nesting attempt to the scheme of things. So when you're finding nests, you figure out which birds are in the area, you figure out what territory they've got, likely spot within that territory, depending on the species, and then you home in on the nest. So you might feel that you might need a little bit of help finding your your nesting rhythm and what to do. So there are a couple of things that you can do to get the most out of the information that you're gathering. Obviously, the more nest records that you the more nest records you submit, the better. But you might like to focus a little bit. So you could consider monitoring a particular species or group of species that are under-recorded. So this doesn't necessarily mean finding the peregrine in your town, for example, as the nest record scheme does get quite a few records from some unsurprisingly common species. So you can go to the BTO website. If you type in online ringing report BTO, you should get to this sort of area, and you can click on the nest record submissions, and you can see how many nest records are submitted per county in a particular year. So you're never going to guess what. I managed to look at Berkshire, and 407 nests were submitted in 2023, which is pretty good. Obviously, like the nest record scheme all over, many counties, the blue tit is the most nest recorded species, which is great. The more information we have on the blue tit, the more the more power the BTO has on looking at regional trends and even county trends, and looking at differences between the counties on productivity. But then we've got quite a few different species here, which is quite good to see. Corn bunting. Oh, I've only ever seen one of those. and yellowhammer nest. All of these with ones is pretty good. Saying that, it's quite surprising. There are quite a few missing species here that aren't submitted, that seem to stand out to me, like swallow, for example. No one in the whole county managed to monitor a swallow. There are only about 15 nest recorders in the county. Well, nest recorders or groups. So there isn't that many of you. But yeah, swallows missing, mute swans missing, house sparrow, don't know where they've gone, starling, wren. So yeah, that's definitely something that that could be worked on. And there's also their under-recorded species of birds of conservation concern as well. So here we've got the orange is amber listed birds. So grey-lag goose is one of those. And red is obviously the highest conservation concern value. Skylark, for example, we only get 49 nest records of those for the whole scheme in a year. So it's quite impressive. If you do find a nest of one of these species, the amount of impact that you have can be quite amazing. Jay, for example, only 4 nest records submitted, and they're not particularly difficult. To be honest, we get 3 times that many golden eagles submitted than we do jays. So yeah, that's quite amazing. I know I managed to find a goldcrest nest in one particular year, and that was 25% of the whole annual total for the scheme in that year. So you can have quite a big impact. And here's a list of some of the people that have contributed massively over the years by just focusing on a particular species. Bob Danson and David Warren are amazing at the amount of effort that they put in. So basically they don't take holiday during the breeding season. They are completely focused on their tree sparrows and reed warblers and pigeons, and all this information that they've recorded, because it is so intense, or so committed, I suppose, and it's a particular area. It's a long-term data set. This information is just like gold dust to researchers, as well as the BTO, obviously. So what I'm going to further illustrate what sort of impact you can have by a few examples, by looking at some of the nest recording team at the BTO's involvement. So one of my colleagues used to live in one of these houses, and he used to have this pond behind his house, and as a child, and it was just a fairly small site, but there were birds nesting on there, and particularly water birds, actually, he's focusing on. So here we've got the moorhen and the little grebe. So I'm just going to run through a rough year for this. So there is a pair of mute swans. You can see them, the 2 little white dots there on the lake, and they nested where the yellow arrow is. So you've got one nest to monitor for this particular lake, and then there were 4 moorhens nesting, and they're multi-brooded, so they'll have several nesting attempts. So in a year, you would expect to find 10 nesting attempts for moorhen. And then there was another 3 coot, and they're also multi-brooded, so another 6 nests there were recorded for coot. And then there was some little grebes, and they contributed 3 nest records. So altogether, this tiny little pond contributed 20 nest records of what is a fairly under-recorded group of birds. Obviously, around the edge, you've got the woodland that has the blackbirds, the dunnocks, the house sparrows, all sorts of things nesting. Taking it to slightly the next level, this is a map of Thetford, and what I do is create a shareable Google map that I share with my colleagues and people interested in recording nests in Thetford. And what we do is share this around, and as soon as you find a nest, you put it on the map. Each nest pin and color and shape of the pin denotes if it's active or if it's failed or successful. And you can see here the likely spots where we all go to do our nest recording. But it basically reduces the chance of multi-recording of the same nest, which is good. So as soon as you put it on the map, basically, as far as I'm concerned, that's your nest to monitor, and you can follow it through to its outcome. So there's several things to consider when you are doing your site selection. Just remember that you'll be going pretty frequently. So we usually recommend every 5 days to a week, somewhere around there, and that you can sort of fine tune the timing depending on what stage the nest is at, or nests. But generally every 5 days to a week, you'll be doing pretty good to get all the information that we need for a nest record. You should have landowner permission, even on a public site. And that's really good for public relations. And generally, I found that the landowners are actually really interested in what you're doing. And they have no idea, potentially, of what nests there are on the site, and especially how successful they are at the nesting stage. You've also got to consider dealing with the public. So if you don't like people coming up to you and saying, why have you got your head in the bush? Then maybe don't go for a public site. But I found it's usually quite nice to chat to people and encourage everybody to do some nest recording, which would be good. And is the habitat that you'll be searching, is it accessible? So thinking back to that massive bramble patch, it's probably worth avoiding that, especially to start with, because one of the worst feelings in the world is seeing a bird fly into a bush like that, knowing you can't get to it and monitor the progress. So some of the some of the best nest monitoring that we get from people focusing on a particular species. So barn owl monitoring is definitely one of those that ticks that box. Usually it's linked in with ringing. So as you can see in the top left, that barn owl's getting ringed. But what can happen, sometimes you put so many boxes up that you can't get good quality, you can't make enough visits to each nest to produce the good quality nest record. And it's much better to have a good quality nest record than lots of partial ones. So giving an idea of where birds are nesting, this is the BTO HQ, and there we do run nest recording courses once a year, and we frequently turn up blackbird nests, song thrush nests. You can see the color of the egg is much more sky blue, really, with a mud lining. Beautiful nest that is. Don't find enough of those. Then we've got wrens and little chaffinches. They're usually on the side of a tree, in an ivy or in a little crook like this. Absolutely stunning eggs. And then we've got the BTO reserve. As you can see, there's a few points on there that have previously found nests. It could be a goose in this case. And we frequently turn up things like chiff-chaff. And this nest is off the ground by about a few inches, which denotes it from willow warbler, which is usually on the ground. Then we've got linnet, a lovely nest as well. That's usually in the gorse or the bramble. And then we've got the dunnock, of course. A whitethroat. You can see it's sort of decorated around the edge with little bits of spiders' webs and feathers and things like that. And that's usually just under the leaves of a bramble bush. And then we've got the robin in the bottom left-hand corner here. And robins are surprising, considering how common they are, how difficult they are to find the nest. They just know you're looking at them and they can nest absolutely anywhere. They can nest in a box, on the side of a tree, in a bush, on the ground. I've even found robin nests in the middle of a woodland floor, just with between two leaves. And spotting that, it took me ages, from sitting at a distance and just watching the behavior. Yeah, it's still really nice feeling when you find one, just to get the all that important data. And then we've got Thetford Forest, one of our largest lowland coniferous forest in Britain. And there's a wealth of different species in woodland, even coniferous like this, especially where there's clear fell. So you can have lots of different species of warblers, finches, and even special birds, like this woodlark here, which is fairly common. I must add that this is also a Schedule 1 species. So if it's a Schedule 1 species, you've got to get an extra license to go near their nests and disturb them when they're breeding. One of the other things that you could easily do, like me, is create a box project. My boxes are slightly bigger than the average, and they are specialists for tawny owls. And in Thetford Forest, I've got 36 nest boxes that we go around every year to monitor the productivity of these birds. So the idea is that in Thetford Forest, it's mainly coniferous, so not classic tawny owl habitat. But we are monitoring their productivity, and it's amazing how much it varies from year to year. Usually, if they nest, then they're successful. And we get somewhere between 5 and 8 nests a year, depending on what sort of year it is. But the nest boxes are more closely packed. So we really do, I really would like every tawny owl to be nesting in one of our boxes, so we can monitor the whole population. And as the nests are quite closely packed, we do get lots of other things nesting in them. Stock doves, for example, also amber listed, like the tawny owl. Occasionally we get these. This is a squirrel dray. You can see the two little tails of the squirrel kits doing their best to hide. And then we get these. So the first time we saw this in a nest box, it was rather surprising. And it didn't have well, it was a bit of a shock, to be honest, to see so much fluff and so many eggs in what we were expecting to have 2 eggs of a stock dove. So yeah, so we had to think about this, and it soon came pretty obvious who the culprit was, and it was mandarin. So we do have a bit of a population here in East Anglia of mandarin, and they take really well to boxes. And like tawny owls, the females are incredibly site faithful. So we can catch the female one year and then catch her again the next year and again the next year, and then we know her survival as well. So that's quite incredible. The tawny owls, for example, they do also keep to the same boxes, and there's one particular tawny owl that I've been monitoring, and the first year you would go near the box and she would fly out, and then the next year you would put the ladder up and then she would fly out. And now I can easily just go up to the nest, open the door, she will sit there, I put my hand in and get her leg and pull it backwards so I can read the ring, I can tuck a foot back in, close the box, go down the ladder and fill out the nest record information, and I know that she's alive and safe. So that's lovely. I know the time is ticking, but basically for the nest record scheme, it's handy with all you need is a notebook, a pencil, and something, some nests to find. And that's basically all you need. You can see here that there's a few people have got sticks, especially that's called a nesting stick, which you can use to support yourself, part vegetation, and also you can attach a mirror on the end, so you can actually look inside the nest without having to climb anything. If you wanted to, you could get very technical and use ladders. You could buy an endoscope to look in holes. I've used security cameras or trail cams to put near the nest, so I don't even have to visit, but I get much more information on that. You get quite a few, you can put cameras in nest boxes as well these days, so you've probably got some at home where you can actually follow minute by minute the productivity of your one nest. You can use thermal imaging to find the actual birds themselves that are sitting on the nest. Or like me, you can train other people to go out for you. Then you can allocate them a certain number of boxes in an area, and then you can move on to the next place. So that really helps. And here we go. This is Tony Davis on one of our nest recording courses, and he's parting the vegetation with 2 sticks. He's getting very technical and looking at a nest there. So that's really good. So mentioning the nest recording courses, the BTO does run 2 nest recording courses, one at the BTO and one at in Hampshire in the New Forest. And we basically get 12 people to come out who are already nest recorders and have tried for a year or so to nest record, and then they come along with us and we can teach them the finer skills of nest finding, particularly for the more difficult species like the open nesting warblers and things like that. And there are several other groups around Britain as well that do their own nest recording courses, which is great, including taster days. Our one is an extended weekend, so that can be quite exhausting by the end, but I've learned a lot from going on those, even as a trainer. We've also got, we also released mentoring as well. So some some nest recorders have signed up to be willing to show and inform new nest recorders on how to do it and how to support the scheme. Here you can see there's quite a few in the Reading area. Not loads, but it's quite a good density. So what you do is go to the BTO website, well, sign up as a nest recorder, and then you can find this mentoring map, and you can click on one of these pins and contact one of these mentors and either correspond just electronically over email or arrange to go out on a day's nesting somewhere just to figure out how to do it and how to approach nests and things. And when you do go out, seeing the actual chicks and the nests themselves is fantastic. As nest recorders and ringers, as nest recorders, we're very privileged to be able to look at the private life of birds in such a way whilst collecting really important information that could help the species in the future. So that was a starling nest, by the way, on my parents' house. And this is a chiffchaff nest. 2 different chiffchaff nests, by the way. The one on the left you can see is just tucked into a bit of a tussocky grass. So if I saw anything grass that dense, I wouldn't go near it really during the breeding season. But ironically, you can see the person in the top left there, he can't see the nest at all. It's so well hidden, and you've got to figure out which way that the bird is coming in. But chiffchaff is one of those species that's incredibly confiding and will happily go to the nest when you're standing next to it. And it also gives a really helpful, sweet call when it's off the nest, and when it stops, that's the time that it's about to go back to the nest. That's for male and female communication. So it's yeah, it's brilliant. You can also involve the family as well. So there's my daughter up a ladder checking a kestrel nest, which is based on top of an old jackdaw nest. The farmer was really annoyed with this because we found it in the barn, and previously it was on a tree outside her bedroom window. But there you go. And barn owls as well is another one of those that are really lucky to monitor. You do need a Schedule 1 license to get for monitoring these, but they're beautiful birds, even though the nests themselves, oh, they smell so much. and it's really bad. But they're beautiful birds nevertheless. And then we've got the pied flycatcher boxes that you can monitor, or blue tits, or great tits, or anything like that. They're really good. And what normally happens is that all you need to do is go to the box, lift up the lid there, and cover the hole so the bird doesn't fly out, but lift it up very slowly, have a quick peek, and pop it back down. All the information's collected, the birds are safe, got data, happy days. And this is a great crested grebe nest. They don't normally have 5 eggs. They normally 3 or 4. But this was a nest that I just went to a reservoir while I was catching nightingale, and saw the nest. Walked over to the edge of the pool, looked in. The adult that was sitting on the nest, they basically just slide off and just slide straight down into the water, so you don't really know that they've gone. Yeah, just saw this view through my binoculars, and that was it. I walked away, the female came back, and job done. So I think I've probably, yes, I finished my talk there.
Thank you very much indeed, Lee.
That's a pleasure. Hopefully I can encourage loads of other people to do some nest recording.
Well, I was about to say that was wonderfully enthusiastic, and I'm afraid I go through life thinking I mustn't say yes, I'll do anything more, but I've a feeling I'm going to be looking up nesting neighbours when I get home and having a look. Can I ask you to just stop sharing your screen, because then if anybody on Zoom wants to ask a question,
There we go.
Reset the view for us. Go back to everybody. Yeah, hopefully, have we got any questions for Lee? And anybody out there who, well, before I'll ask the audience one question before we get that far. Anybody already participate in the scheme? Oh, excellent. How many nests have you,
I do nest boxes.
oh, nest boxes?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Good.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic.
Right, any questions for Lee?
I did have one.
Yep.
I know you say you can just lift the box. Actually, they're very difficult. They've got dots in there, like widgets. And they have 12. Quite difficult to count them all. Very hard.
I'll repeat that because it won't play very well. Just talking about the one person here who is in the scheme. Any tips on how to count blue tit chicks in a box when there's a large number of them and you can't see them all?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And yes, it can be very difficult. So as a nest recorder, you are able to put your finger in and move them around a little bit, but only if you're confident in what you're doing. What I would normally do, if I would count how many I could see, and if I think that there are any more, I can put a little plus on the figure. So it'll be 10 plus, and we'll have a minimum count, which is perfect. If there's a bird sitting on the nest, then I would probably put the lid down, go and check a few more, and then come back, or visit at another date.
Thank you. Right, any more questions? Anybody on Zoom got a question? Well, the one thing I wanted to know is you said there were 15 people in Berkshire. How many throughout the nation? How many have you got actually involved in the scheme overall?
That's a good question. It's about 600 that are active and submitting nest records every year. And some of those, those are participants, those are volunteers and groups. So some groups could have 15 nest recorders within them. Some groups could be just 2. And it all depends on what group they're doing, really. what they're monitoring.
Right, any more questions? Anybody else? Right, I'm going to wrap it up. That was a fascinating talk, and I have a feeling I'm going to be adding nesting neighbours to my webs and BBS surveys. But thank you very much indeed, Lee. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Right, we will just to finish off with a reminder that it's the photographic competition in 2 weeks' time, but you've still got time to send photos in. You've got till the end of Friday, so please do. And hopefully I'll see you then. Thank you very much.